in terms of gifting funds to charity, ways to do so, and how can we do it tax efficiently? That's important. So should we gift cash or appreciated stock? So we'll start with, in terms of cash, gifts, and donations. Again, gifts meaning to your family members, usually to your loved ones, and donations. So in terms of gifting cash, well, that's the simplest approach. And usually what I would say, if you're thinking about making, let's say, Christmas gifts to, 10 grandchildren, well, that's usually the best approach. You don't really need to complicate your life, just go with cash and that's the end of it. Now, in terms of gifting or donating appreciated stock, it certainly requires more planning, more paperwork to be specific. Time, your tax benefits can be quite significant, and we will discuss what they are in just a moment. In terms of the annual gift tax exclusion, I'm sure everyone, or most people at least, are hopefully aware. It's $17,000 per person in 2023. They increased it to $18,000 in 2024, and that applies to a combination of cash and stock per person. And I'm sure John can tell you much more in terms of how to take advantage of that in different ways. So this is just more of a reminder.
And I'll just jump in on that quickly, Alex.
Please.
So people say, well, great. So I give $18,001. What, am I in trouble? No, not at all. It just means that $1, you just have to report to the IRS that you gave a gift of $1. And why do you report that? Because they're going to knock it off of your taxable estate. They're going to say, look, you've given out stuff that's then should have been taxed as part of your estate transfer. So no big deal if you give more than that limit. And people do that. But just remember, anything over that, and again, we only have a few days left in 2023, but 17 or 18 next year, just make sure it triggers on your form for your taxes. If you give more than that max, you have to file that. That also taxable gift. That's not to just your beneficiaries or your kids, it's anyone you want. But just remember, anything over that limit, you have to tell the IRS you gave more than that limit.
Sounds good. Next slide, please. In terms of stock gifts, and again, we're talking about here about gifts to your family members here. So why would you want to do that? Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons I tend to recommend that to the grandparents that I work with, and in some cases they want to give to their grandchildren. Well, that's a great way to provide a certain investment education to them. Instead of just gifting them cash so they go and buy themselves the latest piece of electronics, well, why wouldn't you give them 2, 3, maybe 4 different stocks from perhaps some of the major companies, so they can keep track of it, perhaps invest more, perhaps they decide to sell some of it. But again, the educational piece is there. Now, in many cases, I'm inclined to say it's actually in most cases, that your adult grandchildren, or maybe not in most, but in many, again, will likely be in a lower tax bracket. So as you can see here in this example, so if Judy, our grandmother, is in a 25% tax bracket, if she decides to sell that accumulated a $700 capital gain, well, she'll end up paying some capital gain taxes there. That's by the federal and state, which is what people tend to forget. They only focus on the federal tax, but there's also state tax to pay on capital gains. So in this case, the actual gift once would be right around $825. Now, if she gives the stock to her grandson, Eric, who again recently graduated, has limited income, essentially no income, 0% tax bracket, if Eric decides to sell the stock, he'll end up paying no taxes whatsoever. Now, I was actually thinking about redoing the slides at some point in the future, because when you deal with $1,000, I can see how some people would say, big deal in the long run. What if you're gifting, let's say, $18,000, which is again the annual gift tax exclusion next year of appreciated stock, and let's say half of that is unrealized capital gains, and let's say you give that to multiple grandchildren, and that can save you thousands, maybe even tens of thousands in tax. Again, if you decide to do it over time, can result in significant tax savings. Next slide, please. So So again, these are two charities at this point. They are tax deductible, assuming you're itemizing, and I'm not going to go in this whole itemized versus standard deduction today. I will say, though, that at this point, that's the actual statistic, only 13% of the US population itemizes on their tax return. So you have to be careful because this only helps you if you're itemizing on your tax return. But the idea is very similar. If you donate, appreciated stock to charities directly, again, you would need to complete a form to do that. You eliminate, potential capital gain taxes, and you also receive a tax deduction. I know I'm repeating myself if you're itemizing. So in this case, we have Raymond here who wants to gift $5,000 to United Way. Well, again, if he sells the stock that accumulated $3,500 of capital gains, he ends up paying roughly a quarter in capital gain taxes, is significantly lower, something like $4,125. Now, he can just donate the stock directly, receive a deduction, or potentially receive a deduction. So usually here, by the way, to me, it's, for my clients at least, it's very clear. Anytime we deal with larger amounts, and I would say $5,000 would certainly qualify as such, I would almost always appreciate stock if it's available versus donating cash. Again, for smaller ones, perhaps why bother? But for larger donations, can stock. Next slide, please. Charitable distributions, or QCD, which is how people tend to refer to them once you kind of get to know the strategy. So what are they? So they only really apply to people 73. So if you're not 73 yet, certainly something for you to know, but there's really no advantage of the strategy unless, again, you're required to take the so-called required from your IRA or 401k accounts. But the idea here is actually pretty straightforward. The idea is to donate a portion of your RMD directly to charity. What would you accomplish by doing that? Well, the amount that you donate essentially bypasses your tax return entirely, so you don't pay any taxes at all. So the idea here is to satisfy your charitable intent and, of course, minimize your overall tax liability. John here, who's really happy because he learned about this strategy recently. So John's RMD this year is $30,000. He's in 24% tax. If he decides to transfer $20,000 to different charities, so he's very generous this year, well, his tax savings would be, again, $20,000 multiplied by 24%, $4,800, plus, of course, if you live in a state such as Virginia, Maryland, or DC, you'll also save some in state income taxes. So again, it can be quite beneficial. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of donor-advised funds, or DAFs? And I'll tell you before we start talking about this, they tend to be very popular in years when the markets are doing really well. So they're quite popular in 2023. They were not all that popular last year. And again, I'll explain why that's the case. So the idea behind a DAF, which is how you would normally refer to it, is to essentially donate usually a large amount of appreciated stock. Yes, you can donate cash, but it rarely makes sense to do so. But then, continue to invest the money inside of the DAF and decide what charities and when would receive your funds. What's important here is that your contributions are tax deductible in the year of contribution. So it's really ideal for appreciated stock. earlier, the funds that you contribute into the DAF can be distributed to different charities over any number of years. So here's an example here. So Marilyn wants to give $5,000 per year to different charities. Now, if she decides to do that each year, perhaps that's a good strategy for her, but there's a strong possibility that she would not be able to itemize her deductions if she's only donating $5,000 per year. Now, again, contribute $30,000 into the DAF. I can tell you it automatically would put her in an itemized situation because it's way above the standard deduction. So she would get the $30,000 tax deduction, again, eliminate potential capital gain taxes on appreciated stock. And then over the next, in this example, 6 years, she simply donates $5,000 to different charities over time. Again, the investment component, most DAFs will allow you to keep it in something very conservative, so you're not going to get much growth. But at the same time, if you're inclined to do so, you can invest much more aggressively. So perhaps over time, your gift, will become even larger. So this is, again, a great tool to. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if we have any more left. Yep. This is great. Oh, there's one more. We missed the 529. Yeah, this is one of my favorite, actually. So should you consider college savings plans? And this, again, in the context of our webinar today, I'm not so much focusing on the benefits, meaning obviously it's one of the best tools for college education, but I'm mostly focusing about, in terms of multi-generational planning. So the idea here is to give a purpose, which is education. And I'll tell you, for, again, many grandparents that I work with who want to support, the next generation, want to give the money to the parents because they're just going to spend the money, and maybe the grandchildren are just too young, right? They're minors, so that creates issues. So the 529 plans are a perfect vehicle for that, because again, you make a contribution. In Virginia, you can $4,000 per beneficiary per year. So if you have multiple grandchildren, it can be quite beneficial for you. You retain full control over the funds, but as long as the funds remain inside of the 529 plans for at least 2 years, they're out of your estate. So it's also a great tool for estate planning purposes, again, when we start dealing with larger funds. Now, in terms of the Secure Act 2.0, I'm actually going to dig deeper into this over the next couple of weeks, because this piece of the legislation will become effective in 2024. So if you have a beneficiary at a for at least 15 years, that's important. So it needs to be in place for at least 15 years. And there are some residual funds. There you can actually convert up to $35,000 into the Roth IRA. The amount is limited to the annual Roth IRA contribution, which is $7,000 next year. But it's a great strategy, again, for those residual funds inside of the 529 plans. I have a feeling we'll be getting, many more questions about it next year. But again, great tool for tax efficient, multi-generational transfers.
And I would add on the Secure Act part, that is definitely a thing. A lot of families just nationwide are starting to convert or roll over anything from traditional to Roth IRA because of the tax consequences down the road, right? With what's called the 10-year rule for the Secure Act. Now they're trying to save taxes for their kids or whoever would get their IRAs if they don't use it all.
That's right.
And with that, we're just transition back to kind of open Q&A for our attendees. I also definitely want to thank Alex for his time and being generous and coming on and talking with us about a very important topic, not just protecting things, but how to grow it. And those two graphs are very eye-opening because of the amount of savings on $1 million portfolio is not small. if you just start a little bit earlier and do it the right way. And yeah, that can really go a long way for your comfort in your later years. And then I, of course, be happy to answer any questions specific to estate planning and maybe how those two things could be linked together. And then I'm also, for anyone watching, going to go ahead and leave you with Alex's slide. This is his contact info. And of course, Alex, if you want to offer anything else for the audience, please.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what's, I would say, different about Capital Square in terms of our intro meetings, and again, my contact information is on the screen. I actually refer to them as strategy meetings. And it's, of course, great to, to do a normal meet and greet, to get to know about each other. But if you're willing to share some of your, financial information, my objective would actually be to make it productive for you. Of course, as part of the initial meeting, I would not be able to provide any specific advice. We need to be engaged for that, but I would be more than happy to give you options in terms of the possibilities. And that's been quite popular, which is why I changed to a strategy meeting versus just a typical, meet and greet. So yes, feel free to reach out.
Yeah. And then similar to that, we do what's called a life and legacy planning session, which we're going to review some of those assets that Alex is helping with, and then look at how if they're titled correctly in the event of your death or incapacity. And then we love to do kind of coordinated planning with Alex, or even multi-generational planning with you and your families as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have the chat window. I think I've taken everyone off of mute. So we are happy to answer any questions via microphone or just on chat. If anyone has anything.
Well, yeah, and while people are thinking about it, John, you mentioned the charts I showed, and that's something I actually started doing much more frequently, because it's if you just say it, what is the difference between a rate of return of 5% and 6%? Well, it's just 1%, right? It just doesn't sound like a lot. Now, if you show someone the difference over 5, 10, 20 years, specifically when you deal with larger sums of money, I mean, it can be dramatic. It can be dramatic. So that's why, again, and I know I emphasized this point multiple times, that's why it's so, again, dangerous to invest conservatively or overly conservatively when you. So
I think the eye-opening story I heard a while ago was, if you're just saving money and you save a lot of money between the ages of 20 and 30 and then stop, you're actually better off than if you were to not save between 20 and 30, start saving money at 30 and then go for the next 30 years. You'll actually have less because of that time value. The earlier you can invest, the better it is.
It's amazing, John. So don't quote me on this. So here's a good one for you. Maybe it's actually very easy to become a millionaire. It's amazingly easy. So all you have to do is invest 25 in the market, if I'm not mistaken, for 27 years. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm speaking from my memory. But that's all you need to do. So if you're able to invest $25 per month when you're in your early 20s, for 27 years, if I'm not mistaken, you'll have $1 million.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And
so, and always, we also go back to, then why do all of this? Well, Alex mentioned some great things. You could travel more, you could live a better life. But I will also point out what Alex mentioned is the long-term care. So the cost of I don't want to finish on a bad news story, but the cost of long-term care on average in the DC area is around $10,000 per month.
Easy.
Right. And so long-term care insurance is a thing, but only, I think, 8% of Americans have it. So very, very few Americans have long-term care, which leaves you with two options. If you are qualified financially for Medicaid, Medicaid can pay for long-term care. After you're gone, the federal law requires that your estate pay it back to the extent that it can. And the other way is you just write a check. So private pay. And those are really the only three ways, Medicaid, private pay, or long-term care insurance, that we can pay for our care as we age in this country. So I think it's a really good idea to have a plan for that, right? Most of us will need long-term care as we age, like far, far more than is generally realized. 60% of Americans die in hospitals. 20% die in some sort of an assisted living facility. So the math is there that most people will need this. So we want to make sure that your family's prepared for it. Right. And a great way to do that's with Alex and a good financial planner so that it can grow. So you're not leaving your kids holding the bag on something like that. Anyway, Alex, the thoughts on that?
Oh, I have plenty of thoughts on that, John. Again, I would say that's probably, as I'm thinking about it, that's definitely in the top three, if not top three, maybe top five reasons of why people reach out to me to begin with. Unfortunately, again, it's not like people wake up in the morning and say, let me go see a financial planner. That rarely happens. Usually there's some kind of trigger point. And one of them is, again, long-term care. What would happen exactly? How would I pay for it? Sure, let's say you've accumulated some money. That's great. But let's stress test it. What happens? You see, the devil is in detail. It's one thing if you need long-term care expenses when you're 90 years old. I'm inclined to say it's not likely to be a big issue because when you're 90 years old, chances are your life expectancy isn't all that low. But we still need to cover for that. What happens if you need that type of care in your late 60s, early 70s? Okay, you still have that longevity. You still have 5, 10, 15 years perhaps ahead of yourself, and exactly how are you going to pay for that? So again, it's how you want to look at it. Now, not to overly positive way, but in terms of budgeting for it, well, let's say you do need this type of care. Well, chances are you're not traveling around the world. You're not buying yourself a new car every 2 to 3 years. A lot of your expenses would essentially be redirected toward that type of care. And I'll tell you, I go to different here, retirement communities around our area to present, and what they offer tends to be quite inclusive. So it's like you pay that $10,000 fee that you're referring to. Some of it can actually be deductible, so that can help with your taxes, and it also covers a lot. That's actually one of the misunderstandings. When I again work with brand new clients, they always envision it as almost like two budgets. I'll continue to spend $10,000 per month for my regular living expenses, and then 10,000 more for a retirement community. That's not true. Again, once you transition, a lot of your expenses would essentially be, let's just say, eliminated. So again, it's more complex analysis that I would say benefits a lot of people.
And also, I don't know if you saw it, we have a question that came in.
Oh,
and it's over in the Q&A block. It's if you're 50 plus and self-employed, kind of what's a great strategy or mechanism for investing? What's recommended? IRA, CD, personal savings, or I'd also offer something else maybe, besides those three as options.
Yeah. So, I'll start with the first line, I guess, in terms of self-employed. So as a self-employed person, you have many more choices in terms of how to save for retirement versus a W-2 employee. So I will start with a SEP IRA, self-employed IRA, where you can actually save up to 25% of your net income. So that's quite something. Usually when I work with someone who's again self-employed and earns more than 100,000, that's usually my threshold, I would suggest a solo 401k. And one of the advantages of a solo 401k plan or individual 401k plan versus a SEP IRA is you can contribute as both as an employee of your own firm. So, for someone who's over 50, it would be more than $30,000 per year plus 25% of your net income. So that can be much more than a typical SEP IRA. Now, one of the most beneficial, but it doesn't work well very frequently, you need to have a lot of income and it needs to be stable, is to create a cash balance plan, which is a form of a pension plan essentially, and it's age-based and it's income-based. The limits are astronomical in some, like $300,000 a year pre-tax, but those plans are much more complex. They tend to work well for small medical practices. That's my observation. The second part of that question, IRA, CDs, or personal savings. So IRA is a type of account, right? So anyone can contribute into an IRA account as long as you have enough income. CDs, or certificates of deposit, and personal savings, they're types of investments. So again, if someone is in the 50s, perhaps not thinking about retiring anytime soon, I'm not sure if CDs and personal savings are the best choice. But if you're that conservative, or perhaps you have different retirement plans, they can be good choices with current interest rates. So hopefully that's a good enough answer.
So, and I think we're approaching kind of the top of the hour, so I think we could call it. Any last questions from anyone? And then Alex, also, of course, for you, kind of closing comments, closing remarks, or are we good?
My only closing remark, which is a very biased remark, I do believe that everyone should have a plan in place. That's something I've been saying for a long time, because again, it can prevent so many issues when it comes to estate planning, when it comes specifically to retirement planning. And I will say this, if you are, say, 5 to 7 years away from retirement, it's a must, because that can prevent so many issues in the future.
And I will
So,
absolutely back you up on financial plan, estate plan, having a plan. We get calls almost every day from families that are a little bit panicked because they didn't have a plan. And I will tell you, the worst planning is crisis planning. It's almost impossible to get a good, well thought out, rational plan in a crisis. So let's not let that be your major life event that triggers a plan, right? So please feel free to reach out to us with us as well, or Alex or myself, Legacy Lawyers, Capital Squared Financial. We have our contact. And with that, have a great day. And all you viewers, thanks for taking the time out of your valuable time out of your day to attend. All right. Talk to you guys later.
so much. Happy holidays to everyone.
Yes. Merry Christmas and happy holidays. Yeah.